Now, it's very, very difficult to understand families. We all know that. You've done this work before. Families are, despite their really wonderful experiences, they can be really tough places too. They involve lots of people and complicated organizational structures, and it can be very, very hard to negotiate and maneuver your way through that. So from an FFT perspective, we tried to bring some things to the table to help you with that. Primarily, we're going to bring, as you go through the training program, we're going to bring you three large things. First, as you can see at the top here, the picture of the young man looking at the world through dandelions. You're going to hear me talk about the lens of FFT a number of times through this training program, but it is central. How you look at families, how you understand families is going to become a primary and maybe even core and foundational element in being successful. If you can look at the space between them rather than just what's inside them, you're going to develop a way to have more effective interventions and more different kinds of interventions. Secondly, we're going to bring a map to you. You know, any journey is better guided by a map than it is just guessing. And so the journey that FFT is going to bring is a 3-phase model where you're going to develop the core foundation of what it's going to take for the family to help themselves and help each other. A next step which builds skills, and a next step what helps them use those skills in different settings. It's a map, and it's a map that you use with every single family. But like with all maps, you don't follow it linearly. You're going to have to go around different barriers. You're going to have to confront different challenges. And just like traveling on the highway, some days there's road construction and you're just going to have to move around it. Third, we bring you what we hope is a model that's not just filled with a protocol, but a model that's filled with art. FFT is structured, but FFT is enormously creative in how that structure gets implemented with families in an everyday practice. We're going to help you create the structure for you to find your own creativity. Because at the end of the day, we want you to practice FFT as you, not as one of us. We want you to do the model with high adherence, but we want you to be able to do the model with your own voice and in your own way. FFT is not a static model, even though it's been around a long time. FFT is an evolving model, and through each of the things that myself and Jim Alexander has written, we've tried to develop FFT and incorporate the new things that have developed and new things that have emerged into the field. So unlike some models that get fairly set in stone, FFT has been growing and developing over time. One of the features that makes FFT very unique among evidence-based treatment programs currently is the way we practice with evidence. I think everybody now knows that better evidence produces better outcomes. The question now is, what kind of evidence can we bring to bear? What kind of evidence can we put in front of you so that you can use that evidence in every single decision that you make when trying to translate a model like FFT to a complicated and unique family system? So we practice with evidence by some of the things we're going to show you later in this presentation, where we gather questionnaires from families after every single session to get their sense of progress, their sense of impact, and their sense of alliance with us. Practicing with evidence is one of the very unique things that makes FFT special. Second, FFT is a family-based intervention, so whether you're working in a conjoint family session with every member of the family, or whether you're talking individually to a youth, a caretaker, or to a young adult, the focus is on the family and how those discussions you're having impact the way in which that unit of family relationships works together. Now, in having a family focused, it's important to remember that FFT's main objective is to take an alliance-based focus with that. That means working with the family and having tremendous respect for them in regard to how they manage their daily life, while at the same time acknowledging the fact that we're important players in the change process as therapists. And third, FFT is very unique in that it matches to the context. And so FFT TCM, for example, has unique features in it because of the context in which it works. FFT, the core model, has different features because of the context in which it works. So it's important to remember that the clinical change mechanisms that make up the powerful features of FFT and that promote to good outcomes with families have to also change and adapt with context. Now, our focus and how we've been implementing and practicing FFT is very unique. and maybe unlike others. We're interested in being clinically very specific with a model. So rather than taking broad generalities and kind of common statements and applying a one-size-fits-all to everyone, from our perspective, FFT, although it is a very specific model and it already has a pre-planned approach in terms of its phases, it needs to be specifically adapted and translated to a family for it to work. Our focus is on evidence-based decision making. So we want to make sure that every time you make a decision about what to do in the next session or what to do in the current session, that you're using the most current information we can get from the family. We want to have a relevant and helpful training process that has an evidence base. So you're going to see as you go through FFT Adaptware that we'll keep track of many of the things that you're doing, that we're going to focus on how well you do and how well you answer questions so we can provide better help for you. And then fourth, it's extremely important to us, and I think everybody knows as we move through and we develop treatment models now, that it has to involve the family voice in treatment decisions. Now, when I say family voice, I don't mean that means to have a meeting at the beginning of treatment and ask the family what they'd like, but to, in a very relevant way, ask them every time we speak with them how things are going, what they think, what changes they need, and whether or not they are experiencing the impact in their daily life that we're trying to promote through our family-based sessions. So what we've done in the development of FFT is to take the research findings that are emerging yearly, community needs that they've developed, and put them into a way to look at systematic adaptations. So on the one hand, over the last 10 years, we've been focusing on a way to do evidence-based training and figuring out a way to implement and systematically put FFT into community settings. To do that, we've adjusted and adapted FFT into not only the FFT TCM model, but we have an FFT foster care approach and an FFT behavioral health approach, each of which have a different, unique focus because of their context. And then lastly, we spent a lot of time, and we're going to focus a lot of time helping you learn how to clinically implement the FFT model. And what I mean by that is that it's easy to run through just the paint by the numbers steps of engaging and motivating and reducing blame that FFT brings to the table. The real creativity happens when you, as a therapist, an interventionist, a clinician, implement that model in a way that increasingly fits the special and unique things about that family. So in a sense, we're using what's emerging in the field is called a precision behavioral health approach. We're using measurement feedback or real-time feedback from families session by session to help us make that fitting occur. So FFT's really evolved from the early days of community needs and research around helping youth to something much more systematic, all of which is organized to help produce better outcomes for families in different contexts. Let's take a few minutes to talk about what makes FFT particularly effective and why it's a model that we should be focusing our attention on. First of all, the model links skills, goals, and change mechanisms. Now, what I mean by that is that when you go into a session or begin to work on a case with a family, you will have particular treatment goals. These treatment goals are related to the stages of change that a family goes through as they begin to find out about treatment, get engaged in treatment, find it helpful, adopt new things they get from treatment, and then keep those going. So first of all, the model brings a set of goals for you that match the change process that people go through in successfully changing. Now, with those goals, we're even able to link particular therapeutic skills so that you know which skill to use that has the highest likelihood of producing that particular goal. Both of those, the skills and the goals, relate to the evidence-based change mechanisms that the long-standing psychotherapy research suggests will help families produce positive outcomes. FFT is effective because clients have a voice. We ask them all the time. The asking of clients about how they're doing, the alliance they have with us, and how much progress they're making every session not only gives us information, but it also is an engagement tool. It's a way to say to families that we value your voice and your voice is important. At every step of the way, whether it's with your agency, whether it's with a community stakeholder, whether it's with a family, FFT is effective because of its collaborative and alliance-based approach. That means with other service providers, we're always working and reaching out and integrating what we do, because it is the family that's at the center of the treatment system. And it's a family that needs to be benefited. And we need to be the people that take the extra effort to help overcome the differences between service providers. FFT is also effective because we have continuous quality improvement data that fits into our fidelity management, our evidence-based supervision model, our training, and the way in which we monitor cases to make sure that they're effective. So we bring a model that has a lens and has goals and skills. We ask the client to join us and have a strong voice in the treatment. We implement collaboratively with others as two experts, us meaning you and the treatment model being experts in the change process, and families being experts in their life value and what's important to them. And the community stakeholders being experts in terms of helping the family fit into the context in which they work. And it's when it's us working in alliance and collaboration that connects those pieces. And then data. Data that makes FFT not an evidence-based model, but an evidence-based model that gets practiced with evidence in every session. First of all, we're going to ask you to do this model. This is the treatment plan for each of your families. You can see it's got 3 phases: a phase of engagement motivation, a phase of behavior change and generalization. And what's really important to also know is that each of those phases are not such a linear line, but they very much are around and around relational discussions at each of the phases. You can also see that the phases overlap to a degree. But what's helpful for you is when we go to ask you to practice this, the model gives you goals and skills that will help you accomplish those goals in each one of these phases. The map and the clinical model become an anchor for you. They become a guide for you. They become the source and the strength of your foundation to work from, so that you can then adapt to how you're accomplishing the goals of each of these phases to fit the unique family. Now, what you can also expect is that FFT may look a little different than other interventions you practice. It's not forever, it's short term. It has a discrete beginning and an ending. It's conjoint, delivered weekly at least, maybe sometimes more often. And FFT takes place when there are sessions and activities and success in accomplishing goals in each of the 3 phases. Now, you're going to do assessment all the way through FFT, but it's going to be assessment related to the model, and many of your organizations have intake procedures. In those intake procedures, it's important to remember to make them as short as you can. The longer they go, the more difficult it begins to engage families and youth in treatment. Who's a good client? Well, maybe it seems obvious, but any adolescent with mental health, conduct, and juvenile justice or alcohol and drug problems. FFT is a validated, evidence-based treatment for each of these clinical domains. We also need that adolescent to be in a stable family placement. Now, I don't mean happy as stable, but I mean in a family placement that's going to last for a while, even if it's a short time. And that doesn't have to be with biological parents. It's not a nuclear family. It is their primary psychosocial system, because FFT is conjoint, will involve those folks as well. It's an adolescent with no emergency needs, and I don't mean to say that we're not taking difficult cases. In fact, many of our kids have emergency needs all the time. What I mean is that generally good practice. If someone needs hospitalization, let's do that first. If someone needs stabilizing on meds before they begin something else, let's do that. This is not specific to FFT. This is just specific to good practice. But immediately thereafter, let's get FFT started. And then lastly, in terms of what's a good client, we really recommend that you don't try to figure out who FFT fits, but instead take a bit of a different approach. Think of a rule-out philosophy rather than a rule-in philosophy. Meaning, if it's an adolescent with a family that seems to not need to be in the hospital, start FFT, because it will fit with most of the problems. And it will make it much, much easier for you to get cases and fill your caseloads. So try ruling out and assume everybody's in until you make the rule out. Now, sessions in FFT get delivered in either homes or offices. Sessions in FFT last about an hour, and there's nothing magic about that. The only reason to do that is because it's just about endurance and the capability of youth and families and all of us to keep focused for that period of time. Weekly, sometimes in the beginning more than once if it's necessary, but clearly at the end we may also skip weeks as we help them with relapse prevention and generalization. But in the middle and every other time, it's essential that you see them all the time and don't lose touch with them. Who do you work with? Well, FFT is really conjoint, meaning you work with adolescents, parents, step-parents, and involve siblings. And it doesn't mean that everybody has to be there, but it does mean we have to have the core of the family. And so engaging everybody and getting them there the first time is a real challenge, but it's a critical step. Sessions are with the family, not because we think the family caused it. Sessions are with the family because we think the family is the best intervention point to have the most effective way of quickly intervening with the family. Now, if they happen not to come, FFT is a very active intervention. It's not like just waiting to next week or rescheduling. The idea is if they happen to schedule or no-show, what are the barriers? Let's overcome them. Let's call them up, engage them, follow them, find out what got in the way, try to get them there. And lastly, it means that you might have to make room in your schedule to be able to see them the next day or the day after that. How long does it last? Well, it's over when all the phases are completed. That's likely to be 10 to 18 to 20 sessions over 4 to 6 months. If they happen to come back, our suggestion is have them see the same therapist and begin in the generalization phase and see it as a generalization activity, not as a brand new treatment episode.